Space, the final frontier. This is the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. Its mission to explore the solar system, to seek out new observations and data, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. And now the host of the Observer's Notebook, Tim Robertson.
And welcome to episode 197 of the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. I'm Tim Robertson, the host of the podcast and also the coordinator of the training program within the ALPO. Thank you for downloading and listening. The Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers collects and analyzes observations of various solar system bodies and associated phenomena and publishes detailed reports concerning these bodies in its quarterly publication, the Journal of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. This podcast depends upon donations from you, our listeners, to keep it going. If you enjoy what you hear in the podcast, you can donate to it via Patreon. You can start off by giving as little as $1 a month. If you feel even more generous, for $5, you receive early access to the podcast before it goes public. For a monthly donation of $10, you receive a copy of the Novice Observer's Handbook. And for $35 a month, you receive producer credits on the podcast. You can find out more by going to www.patreon.com/Observer's Notebook. If you'd like to join the association, you can for as little as $22 a year. For more information, find us on the internet at www.alpo-astronomy.org. And we're also on Facebook. Just search for ALPO Astronomy. And yes, the Observer's Notebook also has a Facebook page as well. Just search for Observer's Notebook. And if you like what you hear on the podcast, please subscribe. That way you'll never miss another episode. And now, episode 197 of the Observer's Notebook. Enjoy. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody back to this edition of the Observer's Notebook podcast. And today we have a very special guest, Wayne Parker, the founder of SkyShed Pod Observatories. Welcome to the podcast, Wayne.
Thank you very much, Tim. It's great to be here.
Yeah, now before we get into the topic, why don't we just talk a little bit about yourself? You know, where you're from, where you're located, how you got into it?
Sure. I'm speaking to you now from the middle of the country, north of London, Ontario, about 3 hours northeast of Detroit. For those aren't familiar with the Great Lakes area. I'm about to have my 66th birthday.
Oh, happy birthday.
On the 13th. Well, pre-happy birthday, thank you. And I've been a lifelong astronomer. My generation, Star Trek and gee whiz, the time tunnel and Star Wars and all that stuff, got me started as far back as things like Fireball XL5 to Jerry Anderson.
Oh, yeah.
Turn me on. In fact, I'll mention that a bit later. We name our products very much out of those movies and TV shows and stuff.
Okay.
As a way to pay homage to them. And I started, with like most people, a little Tasco when I was around 10, and graduated to I think they were called a C5 Celestron at the time, and embraced technology as it came along, because of course in those days it was either visual or film for most of us. And oops, I thought I closed that. Just do that now. Sorry, my email.
No worries.
Still open there. So I graduated, and that was during the 70s. Then the 80s, as the technology started to come along, I embraced everything that would assist us instead of star hopping. From place to place, to first it was coders and things, and of course the technology really started to break open in the early 90s with the first go-to scopes,
right?
And the first CCD, the little black and white CCD pop-in cameras, and embraced that, and have been embracing technology all along. And but in the 90s, my wife and I hadn't really settled yet. We were moving around a lot, and I'm going to say something. If I had a nickel for every time an astronomer says it to me, and that is, I got really tired of setting up for 3 hours, and then the clouds would roll in. And in those days, all we had was a weather radio, really. to here, and you could sort of say, oh, it's coming this way because it's in London, so that means it's going to be here soon. And so any technology came along, I embraced it and was very happy to see as more integration happened. And of course, now as you know, it's an explosion of technology,
Right.
which we're benefiting from as amateur backyard astronomers and professionals alike. And in fact, last year in 23, at Starfest here, billed as Canada's largest star party, they asked me to do a talk, and I always say yes. And then I say, what would you like me to talk about?
Yeah.
There's a lot of things I could talk about, whether it's business or music or
Right,
astronomy or
right, right.
whatever. So I did a talk. I said, I'm going to do a talk. I'm going to call it, they wanted the title. I said, this is a golden age of backyard astronomy. That was my talk. And I actually, in the talk, took everyone through from about the 1850s up until today,
Oh, wow.
mostly astrophotography, how it has changed and how astronomy has
Right.
changed. They love to talk, actually. A buddy of mine from Astro World TV, Dan Higgins, he was in the audience, and he noticed that my slide list had 240 slides
Oh my God.
in an
Definitely
hour
overhead.
talk. And he said, you're about 20 minutes into it, and I noticed there was 240. I thought, how is he going to get through this in 50 minutes? And it was more like a flip cards. I was able
Okay.
to per sentence go flip, 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 flip.
Okay.
So again, embracing the technology and going back to the 90s now, I was getting, like everybody else, I was spending all my time setting up and getting little time observing. And I started to look around for observatories, and they were very expensive at the time. Most were fiberglass, and they were, $10,000, $20,000. And I had
Mhm.
friends in astronomical societies and groups here. Did you know? I think there's more, not only astronomy retailers and manufacturers, but astro clubs here in Southern Ontario, I think, for than anywhere else in the world.
Really?
Well, I mean, there's got to be 100 astronomy clubs in Southern Ontario.
Mm.
There's retailers like Ontario Telescopes and so on and so on. There's Rock Cam, myself. I'm trying to think. Jim Kendrick, a longtime friend. Kendrick Astro. I'm at a loss now. Are the Savalos with their telescopes and so on. So for some reason, Southern Ontario has always been a hotbed of astronomy and invention, including us, I guess, for some reason, because we don't have the best weather.
Right, right. So
You know,
I'm surprised you have so many astronomy clubs when you
we
said
get,
that.
we get, I get at best maybe 30 nights a year, and you think, why is all this astronomy in so many clubs? I mean, the Ottawa Club, at last count, they had, I don't know, 700 members or something.
Oof.
So a lot of astronomy, a lot of hotbeds. So here I am in the middle of it all. And I was getting very frustrated, having to set up my stuff, and looked around for observatories, and they were very expensive.
Mhm.
And I started to contact my friends. A lot of them were presidents, vice presidents, treasurers of different clubs, and asked them, started a fact find. And internet in those days was kind of limited as far
Mhm.
as this is the mid 90s, as far as examples of DIYs and sheds and things. But what I found was that in each club, let's say there was 30 to 100 members, there'd be maybe two or three that had an observatory,
Mhm.
and one was a commercial, two were home built, and they were kind of the elite of the club.
Right,
Wow,
right,
we've
right.
got an observatory. And people would go and spend time there and stuff, or the club would eventually build one. So I set out. I turned to my wife and I said, I see a real void. I see a real need in the. She's also an astronomer,
Okay.
which is great
Makes it
because.
easy.
Oh yeah.
I want to
Hey,
buy a new telescope. Okay.
I was just going to say that, and now it's a business,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
business purchase.
There you
Honey,
go.
honey, we need a new EQ8RH mount. We really
Yeah.
need it for the business.
For the business. There you go.
So she wasn't that difficult to talk into it, and I said, let's explore this. And I don't want to belabor it too much, the history too much, but we started with I had seen an article when I was a kid in the mid 60s about a professor who had been given permission to build a roll off observatory in Joshua Tree.
Okay.
And that always stuck with me. Now, the thing looked like an old miner's
Hmm.
cabin. It was not a pretty thing, but it was functional, and it always stuck with me. And wouldn't you know it, when we moved out here to the country, I kept seeing these little gingerbread, as they're known, sheds, with flower boxes and things and stuff, and they were everywhere around us. And I thought, if you chop the top of one of those off and put outriggers on it, you could slide the roof off. And I went, a local company, a family business, went to them and said, I have this idea. And they fell for it. And over 2 years, we turned a shed into a sky shed. And we came up with innovative, we looked at what was out there. Again, there wasn't a lot of information. But generally, there were two methods of creating a roll off. There were wheels on the wall, so wheels that ride on the top of the wall,
Okay. All right.
or angle iron and casters. Both of which had their deficiencies. We felt the angle iron and casters didn't have a lot of tolerance. And when I visited a few, I drove around the province, and our beloved Terry Dickinson, who passed away, I guess almost 2 years ago now, Terrence Dickinson, known as the author of Night Watch,
All right.
is also another Ontarian here locally. And I went to visit him, and he could only open the roof about halfway. And it was that style that had casters and angle iron. So I thought we got to come up with something with more tolerance. And wouldn't you know it, while we were talking one day, one of the guys, it was at the sawmill where they make these sheds locally, and we were still figuring things out. One of the guys said, we were literally sitting around by the large industrial garage doors they had. And he said, what about like garage door tracks? And we all kind of thought, yeah,
Hmm.
garage door tracks would lock it on the way they do garage door wheels.
Right.
They have more tolerance. They can move up and down and sideways. So we tried it, and it worked great. And now, 25 years later, and well over 10,000 sky sheds around the world, the design has proven itself over 10,000 times
Yeah. Wow.
through hurricanes and cyclones and all kinds of things. A few have been hit by tornadoes. There was one gent who it was strewn across his lawn, lifted the whole thing up, missed the house, but destroyed the shed. And he said, Wayne, I'm rebuilding immediately. I love that shed, and we don't expect it to take an F3 direct hit. That's about the only one I've ever known of being
Mhm.
destroyed. So the problem with the sky shed was, and something I want to mention that's very important. Uh, the reason I created it, number one, was first selfishly for myself, but
Mhm.
also I wanted something that fellow astronomers around the world could build themselves, duplicate.
Right.
And it's all about, and getting back to access, it's about instant access. It's about your equipment always being ready to go. You might tweak things, prepare for a session, but I can literally get home, look up, oh, it's not supposed to be clear tonight. It's clear. My observatory is up and running in 5 minutes.
Hmm.
So that's really what it's all about, is having somewhere to store your stuff and have it always at the ready.
Right.
So in those days, we started off with the sky sheds, and we started building them locally. But we realized as a business model, it wasn't going to work sort of full time because we couldn't ship them. Uh, it was just too big and heavy and expensive to ship, to build kits, to ship them around North America. So we went with our plans, which people to this day download and use our
Right.
plans to build on their own. They do amazing jobs. I was at NEAF around 2007, so we'd been doing it for a few years. And not everyone was on the internet or much. And a family walked up to me, mother, father, about a 12-year-old son. They were from Texas. And they said, we're not on the internet, not sure, whatever. They didn't know how to use it. And said they had manila envelope with photos in it they had taken. And they said, we built this as a family project, pretty well verbatim as to the plans. It was
Hmm.
absolute, just gorgeous. And they loved it. They'd done a wonderful job. So, and one of the things we started hearing from people, I always remember a gentleman who said, you know, Wayne, before I built my SkyShed, my sons, asking them to come out and help me set up the gear, and I think they were like 12 and 14, something like that. He said it was like asking them to clean their room. They were not interested. And he said my wife was absolutely not interested. He said once I got involved in this and got my sons involved, he said my youngest especially because he was around more. They got it built and with help of a neighbor. He said,
Hmm.
you know, the first night my wife came out with hot chocolates.
Mm.
She had never come outside before, and now she comes out with me all the time. And my sons ask me, Dad, are you using the observatory tonight? He said, and this is the sort of heartwarming part, and we hear this a lot. He said, I want to thank you so much. It's brought my family together. We're closer than ever.
Oh,
I,
fantastic.
you know, I know where my kids are.
Yep.
Sorry, they're not out on the street. And we've heard that a lot. The wishes, the joy that it's brought people. And so now moving on, we realized, as I said, we couldn't ship these things. And I said, you know, we've got to make a little dome that we can
Hmm.
ship around the world.
Hmm.
I want to make it about 9 feet, 9 or 10 feet, but we found that we just crossed so many shipping boundaries that 8 feet worked for shipping, especially shipping. And so we went with 8 feet.
What was that? Was that a cost trade-off in that, or was it?
No, believe it or not, I mean, you've got so many inches on a truck and on a
Ah.
boat and so on, and we were just pushing it. And freight companies don't like it when you use every inch, so
Hmm.
they start charging you. Charges start going up 50%, and we were trying to make it as affordable as possible.
Okay.
You know, my original concept was we have to create the ultimate $995 dome. That was in 2004.
Wow.
Seemed achievable. And actually, the original introductory price of a complete pod without any bays or anything was $1,595.
Huh.
And now they're $3,500.
Right.
And that's just simply constant increases over the years. This supplier calls you or this supplier calls you and says
Hmm.
costs are going up 10%. And we've always sort of absorbed them as much as we can because we really want to make our products as affordable as possible and accessible to as many people as possible. But there comes a point where you're just breaking even or losing money and you have to raise the price.
Yeah.
So we went with Pod, and what do you know? It took off because keep in mind when we came into this, even the companies were existing commercial companies that sold observatories, they sold a handful, a
Right.
dozen, a couple of dozen a year. They were expensive, as I mentioned. So
Yeah.
not a lot of people.
That was the
I
old
said,
ash dome and things like that.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And I love ash domes. They're very expensive, and
Yes.
I refer people to them sometimes when they want a large professional dome for the university and stuff. I say, call Ash. That's what
Hmm.
they do. We do backyard and NASA and other people as well.
Hmm.
Boeing, all kinds of companies, Grumman, what do you call them? Grumman Aerospace and stuff.
Hmm.
Use them, IBM for research, all kinds of stuff. But yeah, I just wanted to make something. I just said, we're going to sell thousands of these. People thought I was crazy. Even the
Hmm.
factory who make them thought, yeah, it's another one of these guys who thinks he's going to sell thousands. And what do you know? When the day we went on sale, within 48 hours, we sold 250.
Wow.
And that was, we didn't expect, like that took, the second problem you have as a small mom and pa is ramping up.
Hmm.
The success will kill small companies
Right.
sometimes because you just don't have the infrastructure to support.
Right. You gotta have the manpower and everything else. Yeah.
Nothing. All of a sudden, you 250 people to deal with in situations and shipping and hardware boxes and so on. So we worked through it, and before long, there was a couple of thousand, and then there was a couple of thousand more, and at one point, we were shipping all over the world. We had a dealer in Korea and Hong Kong and Australia and Altera
Goodness.
Astro and so they were all taking a container a month. We even shipped many years ago, shipped a shipment to Russia,
My
which was
goodness.
strange. Didn't expect that. We didn't ship any more. The dealer was not easy to get along with, and
Uh,
tides turned and things over the years. Um,
Now,
but I do.
where are they manufactured from?
Oh, good question. Thanks for mentioning that. They're right here. They're about an hour north of me here in Southern Ontario. Being a local mom pa, we wanted to employ as many North Americans as we could and outsource as little as we could,
Okay.
as little as we could overseas. That was part of our mission was to make them right here, and we've continued to do that now for almost 25 years. So we're proud of that. So they ship right from directly from the factory to the customer.
Oh,
For
yeah.
years, we had dealers. What happened was after our initial success, every single retailer came to us to ask if they could sell them. Now, we had already spoken to our friends who were retailers in Toronto,
Hmm.
like Kendrick Astro, who were a retailer at the time, and said, "What do you think about this model? We're going to bypass you guys. We're going to sell directly to the customer to keep the cost down, and but then we're going to send them to you. We're not going to step into your territory by selling telescopes, etc., and mounts and cameras
Okay.
and things. We're going to stick to our lane, and then we're going to send them to you, and you can send them to us." But dealers really, they kept getting calls and they really wanted to sell them. So the first 5 years or so, we allowed dealers to do that. But frankly, Tim, it was just too much work, and
Hmm.
it squeezed our margins. They needed
Yeah.
to make something. We couldn't put our prices up, and it was just so much hassle. Very often, the problem was they wouldn't give us names. They'd say, "I have an order. Here's an address."
Yeah.
We pride ourselves on the personal relationship we have with each and every owner if
Hmm.
they want it.
Oh, your website shows that too. I mean,
Well, thank you.
you got from all over the place, owners and their glowing reviews. Was there a moment in time though when you knew this was going to be a success? Yeah,
When
you
we got
mentioned
those,
you
when
said
we
you got
got,
the when you first got the 200. Was that it?
yeah, yeah. Well, just a small caveat. We had set up with Visa, and we told them. I mean, we didn't do $250,000 worth of Visa every month,
Hmm.
So we called the banks and stuff and said, "This is going to happen. We are going to put it on sale, and people are going to use their credit cards. So just so you know, so all the flags don't go off." And they said, "Yep, yep, no problem, no problem." Well, the third day, I got a call from well, I don't know if he was vice president of what, but Visa Security,
Hmm.
and said, "I'm sorry, we can't do this. You have to cancel all the orders and give everyone their money back." And the reason why, we said, like, "What are you talking about? Well, why?" And they said, "Because you're a small mom and pop.
Hmm.
You just took in
A
$250,000
credit,
worth of,
your
yeah,
credit risk.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like, how do we know you're not going to just go bankrupt and all these people will come to us?" So what they did was, and I'm sorry, I'm really digressing here because
No
it's a
worries.
minor thing, but it gives you an idea as a business person, what you're up against. So the deal, and this went on for 2 weeks, and we were like, orders were still coming in. We didn't know what to say. We didn't want to, fall flat on our face on the first
Hmm.
week. We were just negotiating with them, and eventually they said, "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to hold the payment for 16 weeks after you
Oh,
deliver it,
oh my.
and we're gonna hire a company to call everyone and see if they're happy with their purchase and if they're going to return it or not."
Oh my
Unbelievable.
goodness. Oh
And I
my.
had to accept those terms, and we did. And so then we had to go to all our suppliers and said, "Can you float us for 20 weeks?" Hundreds of thousands of dollars,
Oh my
on
goodness.
my word. And they did.
Oh,
We got through it. And within 6 months, we were up to 500 sales and so on. And we really never looked back. Um, and again, the best part of my job, like any other business, every morning I open up to a couple of, a shipping problem, a missing set of keys,
hmm.
whatever. But again, getting back to that first story I told you of the father and the family and bringing
Hmm.
them together, I can't tell you. There was years, through the recession, through the 2008 to 2012, we still kept our head above water.
Hmm.
But it was tougher times. And I would say to my wife, "Well, at least we're rich with karma."
There you
Because
go.
it doesn't keep the lights on. But people just loved us. They loved our products. They loved the designs and how they worked for them. We knew the materials we were using. And by the way, speaking of pod, how I got the idea for pod was, uh, again, we moved to a rural area. I had my SkyShed now, and I kept seeing these calf shelters. They separate young calves from the herd to build up their immune system for a while, and you see them lined up in front of farms. And I went into a farmer, a local guy, just a mile or two away. I said, "Can you tell me about these things?" And he said, "Oh, these things, I bought these in the 70s. They last forever." And okay. And I looked into it, how they're made. It was called rotomolding, which is
Rotomolding.
giant molds that rotate. Think like a giant waffle maker. You
Okay.
fill it, you fill it with polyethylene powder, and it rotates for about 40 minutes in all axes. And that centrifugal force uh, distributes and melts the pigments into plastic, polyethylene, and creates a part. And like Lego, we then use those parts to build a building.
Hmm.
And so the first thing I did was look for rotomolders. And it turned out Ontario was a hotbed of rotomolding
Really?
manufacturers. Yeah, yeah. So I went to see them. Of course, they thought I was nuts. Excuse me. Then we started looking for money. We needed hundreds of thousands of dollars. There was an organization in Canada created a government organization. That is, they're backed by the government, but they're separate. And it was to create jobs in rural Canada after the Second World War, to keep people in the country and not, everyone going to the cities for work.
Hmm.
So they would fund local companies. Maybe you're on Main Street and you're opening up a new store and you need counters, and they will help finance your counters and things like
Okay.
that.
All right.
And I went to them and broke the envelope, pushed the envelope. I said, "We need $500,000. And here's my business proposal."
Uh-huh.
And they bought it
Wow.
unbelievably. And the way they work is there's no dog and pony show. It's not like Shark Tank where you go in and jazz hands and and then
Hmm.
lights and music and impress them with your stuff. It's all on paper. And later they said, "I've got to tell you," the manager of the local office said, "I've got to tell you, I've been doing this for 12 years. Best business proposal I've seen."
Huh.
And so they put it through. We got the money, and I'm digressing a lot. I'm getting into
That's it.
minutia. I'm
That's a
sorry,
good. That's it. No, that's.
but
I wanted to know how it all started. That's
I usually don't get into this stuff. Usually it's
okay.
about the modern stuff, but I'm glad, I'm happy to talk about it, actually, Tim, and thanks for the opportunity
Hmm.
to get it on the record,
Hmm.
And so while we were making pod, and here's the thing, it does last, quote unquote, forever. We don't even know how long these things will last. Many decades. They're not single-use plastic. We don't worry that we're contributing to the world's
Okay.
plastics problem because of the fact that sorry, I keep thinking I've closed all my mail programs, but I keep getting keep getting alerts.
Okay.
So I'm sorry if you're hearing that noise.
I'm
I've shut it
hearing
off now.
nothing. Nope.
Okay, good, good, good. I've shut it off now. Yeah, the thing lasts forever, and of course, soap and water every couple of years, and it's good to go. That's one of the beautiful things about it. There's little or very little maintenance, and I mean, I get calls from people who say, "Yeah, could you send me the assembly video?" It's so easy. We have an assembly video. You just
Hmm.
watch my wife and I assemble one. You do the same, and we have separate manuals for our other observatories. But for pod, it's just so easy. It's an
Hmm.
hour-long video. You watch it and you build it. But people kept calling, asking for a larger one. I
Hmm.
mentioned the 8-foot thing. People like NASA,
Hmm.
people like MIT, and so I decided, yeah, let's go large. Instead of going 10 feet, I thought, like, why go a foot in radius? Let's go to 12 and a half feet. Let's make this thing large. And when you add our, as we call them, bays,
Right.
which if you've seen a pod, you have a
Hmm.
choice of how many, they're extruded wall panels that sit out, and we call them the pod bay. And it's so you can put all your stuff in it
Hmm.
and get it around away from underfoot. So we made a larger one, and it's 18 feet with the bays.
Oh
They're
my.
big bays. You can sit in the bays. You can use it as a warm room, actually. Some people do. Um, and so we made those, and we started selling those to universities and schools and stuff. Now that was through the mid-teens And what happened actually was we just hit our stride with Pod Max, we called it, when the pandemic hit. And it's exponential how many parts are in Pod Max versus Pod. Pod was designed to be very simple, non-motorized, with a large Pac-Man like clamshell opening so that you could guide for hours and not have to move the dome.
Right.
Pod Max was made with the traditional slotted opening, which meant it had to be motorized to track with the scope. That complicates things exponentially. There's 7 hardware boxes with Pod Max,
Oh, my.
one with Pod. And what happened in COVID, during COVID, was suppliers started to say, "Oh, we can't even tell you when we're going to be able to make
Yeah.
custom doors." The Bodine Motors in Michigan, I think they are, in Illinois. They said, "Oh, we're not going to make those." This was like July of 21, and they said, "We're not planning on making those motors again until February of 22." So I just stopped. I just told people it's on a hiatus until we can take your money and make an observatory for you. We're just going to put it on the shelf for a while. And at the same time, during COVID, we decided that Pod was designed when 80% of our owners were doing visual, mostly planetary and lunar, solar, some Messier stuff, but with a small refractor. You could look at Jupiter all night. You could look at Saturn all night, which I did for decades. Used to buy. I remember in the '80s when you would buy the colored filters and say, "Oh, green's great. Lime green's great for Jupiter and bringing out the bands and stuff."
Yep.
And did all that. And but what was happening was our audience was maturing with the technology, and more it had flipped. Instead of 80% of our owners doing visual, now it was 80% of our owners doing astrophotography. And frankly, Pod wasn't designed to be motorized, wasn't designed to track with the scope. And a lot of owners started using the ASI Air and other wireless machines to be able to. So they go out. This is what a lot of Pod owners do. They go out, they open the dome, they know it's good for X amount of hours. They go back inside and they run everything. They may set their alarm to get up at 3 a.m. and close the dome.
Okay.
So people started asking us, "Well, can you motorize Pod?" And we said, "No, it's not designed to be not at all to be motorized. But what we're going to do is in the beginning of 2 months before the pandemic hit, 2 friends and I got together. One who's an electronics lifting specialist, let's say, has been in that business for decades. Another friend who created the Pod Max motor system with me, Gary Bennett, very good friend, got together and we decided we were going to make yet another observatory. My wife just goes, "Oh my God, he's got another idea." Jeez, here we go again. Just as we start to dig out from the last one, I go, "Honey, we're going back in." We're going back to the well. And it's got to the point now with our backers where we pay them off. And then I go back and say, "I'm here again." And they go, "Okay, yeah, here you go."
So how large is your company?
My wife and I.
Really?
Yeah. I had been involved.
But you sell direct from the manufacturer, though.
Yeah, we have an army around us. We have an army of angels actually around us. All of our mom, pa's, big and small, the local companies, whether they're in the U.S. or Canada, medium-sized company and larger, of course, who make larger things for us. They're all, let's say, subcontracted.
Okay.
When I created this company, I had been involved in many partnerships and many bricks and mortars. I had been a musician and traveled the world with my bandmates. That was a business partnership. Still is to this day. Checks keep coming in.
That's good.
Actually, I just got noticed we're being inducted into something that I can't talk about, but it's a lifetime honor, and it's coming up. But unfortunately,
I want to talk to you about at the end of this. I want to talk to you about that.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't know how long you've got here. Your audience is probably left. I'm boring them to tears. I'm sorry.
No, this is good. Well, I'm enjoying it. That's all I care about.
I want to get into the astronomy stuff. Like usually, I'm talking about the astronomy aspects more than the history of our business. But it is, like I said, sort of for the record, and thank you for your interest. It is nice to sort of go through it every now and then and say to where we got, and we're getting to that now. So we started to make this. We decided to make a new one, call it Pod S. and make it interchangeable with pod. That is, use the same footprint that we were already using with pod, make it an 8-foot dome, so that by interchanging and make a new taller wall. So it meant that by having two domes and two walls, we could interchange each so that we actually had four different models
Okay.
with two different sets of parts. This dome goes with that wall, or it goes with that wall, and vice versa. So we had to come up with a name for them. So we called the Mark One the original pod, Mark Two the
Mm-hmm.
original pod with the new wall, Mark Three the new dome with the old wall, and Mark Four the new dome with the new wall. That's the Pod S Mark Four.
Okay.
And the 3 and 4, the Mark 3 and 4, can be motorized because they use the Pod S dome. And we made it so that existing pod owners could swap their dome with the new dome
Oh,
using their same wall, and be able to get motorized. So uh, we went to the existing pod owners who were asking, and a lot of them literally become friends, Facebook friends,
hmm,
astronomical friends. And another thing too is a lot of them come to us wanting I find many astronomers buy observatories because they want to take that next step into serious astrophotography,
mm,
or at least EAA. They at least want to be able to set up and be able to do live video, and so a lot of them are neophytes when they come to me, and I don't have the time to personally mentor hundreds of astronomers, but I can set them on the path and show them the waymarks, the waypoints. And that's what I do with a lot of our guys. And then I invite them to join our very friendly, helpful Pod S discussion group on groups.io. And I say, ask questions. And everybody helps everybody else. And then throughout other communities, of course, and Cloudy Nights and an Alpo, let's say, they're all everybody's helping each other. It's what we
right,
do.
right, right.
So, so once again, there's always, nothing's ever easy. As soon as we started to work on this, as soon as I started to design it and work with our CAD guys and our engineers, COVID hit,
Hmm.
and everything went into slow motion.
Yeah.
It was like trying to R&D through molasses.
Yeah.
This was closed. This was slow. They weren't making this. We had to wait. So instead of taking 2 years the way we expected when we began in January of 20, it took us almost 4 years. It took us 3.5 years.
Mm.
But I'm very happy to say. And what we did was, again, we went back to our existing owners and we said, we took some of them under uh, our cape, you might say,
Hmm.
under umbrella, and said, we want your feedback. Don't tell anybody. Please don't tell anybody. Because, when you start off, you hope it's all going to turn out and you're going to have a final product. But you don't want to go out and advertise when you've got
Right.
an idea,
Right. Right.
But we did take 30 or 40 over the first couple of years and said, when they would ask, and they'd say, hey, Wayne, are you going to motorize this thing? Can I motorize this? I said, I'll tell you what, we're working on that, but you can't tell anybody, but I'll show you stuff.
Hmm.
And they were, some of them would say, they'd send me those memes, like email memes of like, take my money now. And people throwing money. They didn't even know a price. It was like
Yeah.
we had such a good relationship, and they'd enjoyed their pod or their SkyShed so
Right.
much and for so long that they said, well, if he's making another one, I want one. And so here we are this year, finally, in February. We had the first, we hadn't even worked out shipping yet, but we were able to start making them. And I said, for those who are within a few hundred miles, I said, you know what? We can start making these things. But it's like catch 22. You have to make them before you can find out how much it costs to ship them exactly,
True.
because carriers want to know the exact weight, the exact dimensions, and you can sort of guess. You can get about 90%, but that's not good enough for carriers. They want to know to the pound and to the inch.
Yeah.
So we had a steady stream the end of last winter through the spring of people coming from far and wide. Tim Conley came from Plattsburgh, and Samara Nagel came from Ohio, and Jim Wolford came from Indiana, and so on. And then local Ontarians and people from Quebec. And I mean, we told them, look, you guys are what we call first adopters. We're putting together basic materials, a quick video, some written stuff. We're going to
Hmm.
learn with you. You're going to report back. How's the hardware box? Are the nuts and bolts working for you? So it was crazy couple of months where I had about 30 emails to our nuts and bolts suppliers saying, sorry, we got to change the 3/4 inch length to a 1 inch length,
Uh,
you know,
uh,
and send everybody out those right away. We got it sorted out by June, and then we started shipping.
oh, wow.
And now the factory is making upwards of 20 or more pods. And by the way, we sell as many pods as we always did.
Huh.
There's a price difference. The new pod is bigger, heavier. When I say bigger, it's meaning the wall being taller, if you like, if you choose that.
Right.
And then the motor system, it's a big difference. I mean, I remember when people would ask me, yeah, I want to motorize. And I think, are you willing to pay $5,000 to not get up in the middle of the evening to have to close your dome? Because that's what it's going to cost. Motor systems, and especially we decided, again, we look around the world. We say, what is everybody else doing?
Mm-hmm.
Let's do something way better. And I'm sorry to say, it's not difficult in my industry to do better. There's a lot of lacking, shall we say.
Yeah.
We take the high road, and I'm not going to get into that. But
Right.
it's just say, the old saying, it's easy to soar like an eagle when you're surrounded by turkeys. It's kind of like that. So we set out to, we dissected what everyone else was doing. We already knew what we were going to do, but we wanted to see what others were doing. And we knew that, okay, we've got a 21st century system here that is far more accessible and has a far more feature rich than any others have been. The funny thing is, at the end of the day, we don't forget that, we have discussions at a place we call the Cave. It's the Bat Cave. Short form is the Cave. It's because it's a building. It looks like a long tunnel that is dark at night, and inventions and amazing things come out of there. So we call it the Bat Cave.
Okay.
So when we're sitting around, it's kind of our hangout, and it's where we do all our work as well in R&D and stuff. It's about an hour from me. It's sort of centrally placed, so all of us can get to it easily. And so we have a third of our time in R&D is talk. Is just discussing what ifs and what about. And one of the things we always, the bottom line is the motor system has to do a couple of things. It has to rotate the dome, and it has to open and close it. And yet, we've got a very sophisticated way of doing that because it has to be ASCOM, has to interface with your computer, all these things, so that it can track with the scope. So it becomes quite involved, and we really wanted to do something that was right up there with the observatory, that they were peanut butter and chocolate. When people get it, they'll see the synergistic relationship they have. And by the way, we're just there now. The Pod S buildings were ready before the system. And that's because we had some setbacks. There was some health setbacks with the team. There's some family setbacks during COVID. And we decided midstream, our motor manufacturer saw what we were doing and said, no, we have much better one we can customize for you. It meant a complete redesign of this one worked vertically, this one works horizontally. So your boxes immediately have to change, your control, your software. So we basically almost started from scratch about 18 months ago to go with this. It would end up being a superior system and much less software driven, which is what we really like. We didn't have to write all kinds of control software for these motors. It's more of like an on-off thing, which meant we had to go back to start writing software again. So we're just there now. We're in final testing and ramp up for production of the systems. So we're very fortunate that those that have gotten them were willing to. We said, you're not going to have a control system at first. You're going to have to go out there and move it. And they're doing that. But here's the thing. I mean, I built mine in May, and I found out that I won't mention the manufacturer, but I had a mount and a scope waiting in boxes. Hadn't even opened them because I had them for 2 years. I got them. I thought I was going to be ready 2 years ago. So I bought these during COVID, left them in boxes. Both the scope and the mount were DOA when I took them out. No. The mount actually had a cracked armature. Oh. And it must have been installed that way because the box was in fine shape. So first it was, a mystery. What's wrong? Fix it. Find parts. That took only now. In fact, last night, I mentioned to you I was going out last night. Only last night was I calibrating my camera. All these months later, I was very busy with production and stuff. But when I would have an opportunity, parts weren't working, which is often the way. But now I'm there. I'm on the threshold, and our systems are about to be ready. So I'll be installing the system. Now, of course, it's winter here in Southern Ontario, so I'm going to be out there at -20
Yeah.
testing my system. I
Now,
said to the guys, "Couldn't you be ready in the summer, guys?" Excuse me.
now
Go ahead.
does your supplier carry a stock, or are these units built to
No, good
order?
question. They're we don't say custom made, but each is tailor made. So there's a number of reasons. The factory we use to do these, unfortunately, they built on a corner, the farm field behind them, and they can't get larger. They can't build a huge warehouse.
Okay.
So it literally is finished, goes to the loading dock, ships within days.
So they're okay.
Uh,
What's the lead time though? I mean, if someone sends you an order today,
yeah, another good question. That was another thing about COVID. I mean,
yeah.
it got to be 4 to 6 months. It was just the factory be closed for a month. Now I'm very happy to say, generally it's about 2 months, which is
That's for the standard
absolutely
pod.
with and a Pod S as
Okay.
well.
Oh wow.
And I'm very happy to say that because that's better than ever. Actually, it's always been at least 2, 3, 4 months because it used to be the factory would gather up orders and they'd make 20 or 30 at a time because of shipping. We had to ship them en masse. But this year, another great occurrence for us was that the factory here, which is owned by a conglomerate in the U.S., part of 40 factories, they
Hmm.
allowed us to glom on to their shipping system for the first time.
Oh, that
Uh,
helps you out.
Way more flexibility and 50% better shipping prices.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So I mean, we're shipping a Pod S, a full Pod S Mark 5, I'm sorry, Mark 4 XL5, and XL5 is the number of bays. And you may gleam Fireball XL5 is where the name came
Hmm.
from. An XL5 weighs, the shipment is 1,250 pounds. It's 16 feet long,
Oof.
and we can ship it to Southern California for $2,500.
Holy
Unheard of.
mackerel.
Unheard of.
That's
It should
crazy.
be, yeah, it should be 5, 6, 7,000, and that's what it would have cost us had we not lucked into this situation. So it's really nice when I phoned Mark in
Huh.
Temecula and said, "Hey, Mark, your shipping is going to be about $2,400." He said, "Oh, I thought it was going to be about as much as the Pod S, which is 7 or 8."
Wow.
So it's nice when I phone people and they're happy about a $2,000 shipping bill.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
very happy about that. Now, so that's where we are. We've got hundreds now in line, although people say, if I get in line, when am I going to get it? And I say, the line is not linear. These are people who have expressed an interest and given us their names to be updated and have joined our group where we're updating almost daily, our discussion group. But it's about who's ready and who's got the budget now. So if you come to me today and say, "Wayne, I want a Pod S," you're going in line.
Mhm.
And you're gearing up for production. That's the way we do it. And I sort of put shout outs. I'm about to do that soon, where I shout out to the couple hundred who are in line. I say, "Who's ready? I'm looking for 50." And then we gear up, and that's what we're doing now. We're ramping up again. By the way, we've just finished the first 50. We're actually into the second 50 now. Um, we didn't expect the kind of numbers with Pod S that we got with Pod out of the box at $1,400 or $1,500 versus 5,000 plus for Pod S. And the economy times are tough, and so we didn't expect hundreds of orders, but we do have. We're very fortunate. We have hundreds in line, and we're able to ship the 10 or more a month.
Okay.
We're very happy that our suppliers. That's the other thing. Again, ramping up. Now we're in a downfall where we're waiting for another 100 sets of rails to come in. They're delayed. That's a major problem. They have to go with the unit, so we may have a couple of weeks where we actually can't make them. Now I do want to, if I can, say because being that you're Alpo. I just like to say, as an astronomer, the things that I see, and that's the beautiful thing, those neophyte astrophotographers, oh my God, Tim,
Hmm. Hmm.
some of our owners, we send them in, I tell them, go to YouTube, learn, if you want to get really serious, learn PixInsight,
Right.
which is easier than ever, only because of all the YouTube and the Masters of PixInsight, and my buddy Ron Breacher, who's one of those, Sean Nielsen, guys like Trevor Jones at Astro Backyard. These are all my buddies, by the way, and they're all sort of movers and shakers in processing and stuff. And it's nice having them as my buddies because I can just call them and say, "Hey, I'm having a problem." But again, what's amazing me is that people I've seen owners of pods and SkySheds, Podmaxes, say, "Wayne, how do I get into this?" And let's say 6 months later, they send me their first light photo, and maybe it's well. First of all, it's great because I say all astro photos are great. There's no bad astro photos, but
I can send you some.
well, and I got some myself, but I can't speak for others. But I mean, really, even like every day, even more so, my mind is being blown. I'm thinking of Steve Hand in New Jersey, who's got a pod. Steve retired. He hates retirement, from what he says online. But recently, he's really gotten into planetary, and I'm almost daily he's posting, and they're just getting like just yesterday, the day before, he's posted on Facebook, Jupiter, and I'm like, wow, like a year ago, okay, they were nice, but this is really outstanding. And I think of you may know the name Damian Peach.
Oh yeah,
Of course.
I've had him on the podcast.
Great. Well, he's one of my, I'm a fan. And see, I don't know how widely known is outside my following him on Facebook, but I mean, look at that stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's just Robert Reeves who posts lunar stuff every day, and it's just mind blowing. So again, it's the again talking about that synergistic thing. It's perfect now that we've got a 21st century observatory that's going to last, as we say, for most people, a lifetime. Sadly, I could tell you how many widows have come to us and said, or children have come to us and said, "My dad passed on, and what do we do with his pod?" And or people come to me, believe it or not, and say, "I'm the sixth owner of this pod." So when I say, over 10,000 out there, who knows how many multiple owners there've been? We could be up to 20, 30,000 astronomers around the world who've owned pods. Again, talking about that touching thing, a daughter and son emailed me separately recently, asking because they've decided to keep it and how to clean it up and add a few new nuts and bolts or seals and things. And the son said, "Wayne, to give you an idea of how much my father loved his pod, because I never heard from the man after I look back when I hear people have passed. I've got 20 years worth of emails archived. I look back and I go, okay, Bob. And then it all comes flooding back to me. And I go, oh, Bob, Bob's gone. And his son said, to give you an idea of how much he loved his pod, the photo beside his casket was him standing in front of his pod.
Oh, my.
It was his most prized possession.
Oh, my.
And again, touching on the nerve, the heartwarming nerve, I had a way back, I'm sure he's long gone now, a gentleman emailed me and said, "Wayne, just want you to know I'm 92 years old, and of all the possessions I've had in my life, my pod is my most beloved." And I thought, man, we hit the nail on the head. And again, that's what keeps me going every day. I work 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, most days. I get dozens of emails a day from either new inquiries, people who are moving and they want to know how to break it down, a new owner, a question about something. And I deal with it happily, because we see that, we've got many mottos, our company, and one is more astronomers doing more astronomy more of the time. And I had the honor to perform overseas with my band to support the Allied troops during those days. And I was sitting with what would be called our chief of staff, very General Natitian, a very, very great man, a great leader of men and women, I guess, and a peacekeeper, basically, trying to be. And he was really, what most amazing thing about the man was in the middle of Afghanistan, sitting having a break, a coffee. And he said, I hear you're an astronomer and you make observatories. This is really interesting. Tell me more about it. I'm thinking, you got time to think about this. You're running a warrior, And but that he was that kind of guy. And I said to him, the analogy I used, it's not a very good analogy, but I said, you're a chain in the link of thousands of years of peacekeeping slash warriors. My wife and I saw ourselves back in the 90s as we loved astronomy and the passion for if you want to call it a hobby, the interest, and there was so much could be done by backyard astronomers now. And I saw again this void. I thought, I'm going to take this opportunity in my life to see if I can't make that chain in that a link in that chain
Hmm.
stronger in my generation, because as we've supposedly someday, we're going to run out of resources, and we're looking at ways of expanding in the solar system and
Hmm.
beyond. And they say in a few billion years, I used to believe you'd like to believe that mankind will still be around, but our planet's going to fizzle, and we got to get the heck out of here. And so each of us, I think, is just doing our part, you and me, and those of us who are sort of behind the scenes, you might say, the people behind the curtain who are supporting fellow astronomers, that to make this link stronger and to leave it for the next generation. And I love to see, again, people like Trevor Jones and his wife, young Astro Backyard online with
Hmm.
hundreds of thousands of followers, and his wife Ashley, and both. And I
Right.
tell them that I see them. It's like my wife and I 30 years ago, because
Hmm.
I'm in my 60s now. I won't say that for my wife, and they're in their 30s. And I said, when we used to go to Starfest, I used to call them the graybeards.
Hmm.
We were in our 30s, and it was mostly men, and most of them were gray.
Yep.
And now I'm happy to say that when we go to Starfest every year, it's full of families, full
Oh,
of
good.
young people, full of women, and but now I'm the gray beard.
Yep. I hear you.
And so when I see Trevor and other young people, I can't remember his name now, the president of the such a nice guy, the Hamilton RASC, full of vigor and enthusiasm for it and stuff. And I thought it's great to see there's another generation, although I don't know, the generation sort of before mine, as they call them, the greatest generation. I tried to figure out why astronomy came so huge through the 50s, 60s, 70s. And, I think it was those, first of all, hundreds of thousands of troops were taught navigation during the Second World War. So they came back with a knowledge of the stars and an interest probably in the stars. Pilots, navigators, so on and so on. Even troops on the ground learned about navigation. They came back, and as you know, they became hobbyists. They were trained hobbyists, and they were RC hobbyists, and they built things, and they built boats and ships and sailboats, and they got into astronomy. And of course, so when I came along, those gray beards, most of those, or a lot of those, were, if not of that generation, were sons of that generation. And now,
Hmm.
I kind of joke and say our astronomers are getting getting lazy, because it used to be people didn't have a problem with going out and closing their pod at 3 o'clock in the morning. Now they want to sit on the couch with a big screen and run their
Oh,
observatory,
oh yeah. Oh yeah.
and that's what we have to cater to. I mean, that's where the
Yeah.
market has
Yeah.
gone. I love to. I have the ability to run I have a Pod Max. I have all our observatories in the backyard. We have four observatories in the
Hmm.
backyard. And I was out of my Pod S last night, and I was kind of saying, oh, gee, it's a great night. I should have Pod Max running, but I was focused on Pod S and calibration of my camera. Um, but the ability to, again, to go out and to be able to image, and I can do it remotely from my home, but I still go out. I
Hmm.
dance. We're in the middle of the country, so I have my Motown going or whatever it is, and I'm dancing on my deck, kind of monitoring. But I'm also doing like I did when I was a kid. I'm star hopping.
Yeah.
I'm looking at Messier objects. I can use my averted vision. I know where bright objects are. I can tell if it's a good night if I can see the California nebula. If
Hmm.
I can sense it. The other night when I was out, or I guess a couple of weeks ago, I mean, it was so clear, and we're in about a Bortle 4. It
Okay.
used to be a 3, unfortunately, and sure, at one point it was 1. But um, I could, with averted vision, I could make out Andromeda. When I can do that, I'm happy.
Yep.
I'm back to
Yep.
my roots.
Yep.
I'm still that kid, or that at least in my 20s when I was star hopping and using averted vision. So, in summation, our job again is to support And I'm so happy that the technology that people are embracing the technology. I mean, as you know, the cameras, the filters,
Right.
it was one of the things I talked about in my talk about the fact that the oncoming of and ballooning of light pollution. And luckily, 15 years ago, we thought screwed. Now I see amazing shots taken from downtown Seattle in a Bortle 8 or 9 of deep sky nebulae with filters.
Hmm.
So it can be done. Now, it's not to say we like it and we don't want more of it and we don't want more satellite trails, but at least it's actually, we're able to fight through it, let's say. And it's actually, I
Right.
mean, as you know, the imaging and stuff we're seeing now, and the science that's being done by the amateur scientists.
Oh yeah. It's fun.
This
It's
is a
fun.
golden age
It,
for
it,
us.
it really is. What are some of the most interesting locations where your observatories are set up?
Well, I used to say our observatories get to places I'll never see. Um,
Mm,
Mountains in China, uh, an institute in Siberia, uh, Africa. Oh, they're just everywhere. There's some that we have to sign non-disclosures to certain space companies
okay.
that we're not allowed to say that we supply it, and it's unfortunate because you want to say, hey, so and so uses our observatories for
Right.
launches and things.
Right.
Um, but here's the thing. It's not so much, well, some of the locations, people send us photos and you go, oh my God, it's heaven on earth, a valley in California and wine country or something,
Hmm.
somewhere in New England at fall. But here's the most interesting thing. It's the people.
Hmm.
I swear, every owner I talk to, once you scratch beneath the surface, I think every one of them need to write a biography. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And sometimes I get to know people, like people who introduce themselves to me as Bob. Hi, Bob. My name is Bob. I'm looking for information. But then I scroll down to the bottom of their email and it says, Professor Bob Smith, PhD, Professor Emeritus, Harvard, on and on and
Yeah, yeah,
on and
yeah,
on.
yeah.
And I just go, oh my God, like the things that these people have done.
Yep.
I'll tell you a couple of interesting things. Oh, when I talked about people coming back from the war, ham, shortwave. Uh, a few years ago, I noticed a trend, and I posted in our discussion group. I said, "Here's a survey." I said, "Here's the things I noticed that a lot of our owners have in common." Now I'll try and recall it off the top of my head. Uh, Music.
Hmm.
A lot of them, because my background's in music, so a lot of them will
Hmm.
profess to me to, hey, I'm a musician, or I mean, I was a musician in college, or I'm a musician in a part-time folk band or pickup band. Music, ham radio, and shortwave. Now that number is fading, but at one point it seemed like 30 or 40% of our owners were into shortwave.
Yeah.
Professionals, teachers, doctors, dentists, scientists, of course, because they, work at science and then play science on the weekend. Um, but military, vets. I'm trying to think. Those are the main areas. I know I'm surprised. I'm missing a few, but there's a theme, and I started thinking like, is it a brain type?
Hmm.
Is it a character type? And when I mentioned the survey in our group and said, everybody check off, some of them were all five.
Yeah.
Some of them were three or four. Few were one. And then they start to get together as ham. Oh, you're a ham. I'm a ham. And so on. So I find that very interesting. But the thing I find most interesting is the accomplishments of our owners, both before I meet them and after. Many of our owners become, again, I mentioned Ron Breach or Sean Nielsen. There's so many I can't even think off the top of my head. But those are local guys or my buddies. They're easy to think of.
Hmm.
Um, Andrea, I'm trying to think of her last name. She's on the front of like solar magazines, the cover of solar magazines
Okay.
constantly. But what's nice to see is the progress because not only do or many of our owners become proficient if they wish at astrophotography, whether it's planetary, lunar, deep sky, but a lot of them become writers, speakers, teachers, of those things. And that's the most amazing thing for me to see is someone who comes to me, they want to get into it, they get a peer, one of our SkyShed peers, because we also make those, and those are
Right,
also
right.
very popular. Um, they buy that, then maybe a while later they buy a pod or they build a shed, as we call SkyShed.
Hmm.
Um, and before long, I see that they're speaking to the local club, and then they're speaking somewhere else, and then they're a columnist. Now they've got a podcast, a YouTube channel,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
now I start off fans, and I become a bigger fan, and I end up learning from them. I mean, every day is a learning experience, and I learn from them. And it's funny that when I mention Ron and Sean again over and over, but we got Ron started, built him a shed, put in a pier. He got into astrophotography, became a master, as they say, at Pix and Sight. Excuse me. And I should have got water, a little dry. Uh, and he taught Sean, and then Sean became my mentor just through his YouTube videos. I never took a lesson.
Yeah.
So it was like full circle. And now a couple of things have happened that, again, it's too early for me to talk about, but honors coming my way it's a full circle thing. Um, again, every day it's a learning experience. And the most amazing thing for me is, again, the heartwarming stories of people who we've changed their lives. One of the things I hear a lot from people is, I've done more astronomy in the last 3 months than I
Oh,
did in the last 3 years.
absolutely. I mean, like you said early on, I mean, if your equipment is already set up and it's walk outside 5 minutes later, you're observing, it makes it easy.
Oh,
It
changes
makes
their life.
this passion.
Changes your
Yeah,
life.
Wayne, I gotta say, your enthusiasm and passion for this is fantastic. I love it.
Thank you,
And
Tim.
where do you see SkyShed in the next 10 to 15 years, though?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I'm not getting any younger.
Hmm.
As I mentioned, I'm going to be 66.
Hmm.
I've been doing this now for 25 years. I plan on doing it till I drop.
Okay.
I can't imagine doing anything else that I would enjoy so much, and I'd be bored otherwise. I may step back from some facets of it and get others to take over those, but I'm certainly going to still be involved as long as I can be. As same for my wife. Both of us love what we do, and we're very fortunate. We're very grateful. We have the kind of business that while many were suffering, while many businesses and friends who have businesses were suffering through the pandemic, because of the nature of what we do, we were able to sort of skate through it. As you know, astronomy retailers went crazy when COVID first
Oh
hit
yeah. Oh,
because
it's
sales were through the roof.
but
Um,
now you look at Mead and Orion, and
yes,
they're
yes, and yeah,
they're
unfortunately, yeah,
casualties.
yes, and that's the thing. We knew that it was not going to be an explosion for us. People just weren't going to go out and start buying observatories if we're
Right.
just getting into astronomy for such. But we knew that the chickens would come home to roost. Aha.
Hmm.
And that's what's happening now, where we knew that after people got out there and set up two or three, some of them five times, that's enough. And
Hmm.
they're like, I want to do this, but I need somewhere to house it and
Right.
have it ready. That's where we come in, of course. So as far as the future, I never, I honestly, I mean, my team would like to go bigger. They would like to go even, well, not so much go bigger, but get into more custom work. I turned away two universities in the last week who came to us with large projects. And I always say to my team, we don't make custom cakes, we make cookies.
Mm.
Everybody get on those same wavelength. When someone comes to us and they really want to take those jobs on, some of them are multi-year jobs, multi-million-dollar jobs, and they're like, let's do it, and it's,
Well, if you change what you have, I mean, you have to retool and
oh
everything
yeah,
else, and there
oh,
and there's
everyone would be, yeah, everyone,
there's a whole learning curve behind you.
oh yeah,
Your
it's a
process
different
might not
business.
work exactly the same when you go larger, and it's
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Ash, for instance, talk about Ash. They're a
Mhm.
building company. They're a construction
Yeah,
company.
yeah.
You got to be. When you're building that big, that's not what we are. You got to, again, know who you are and stay in your lane. And so we'll get involved. I never know what idea I might think of tomorrow.
Hmm.
Um, but right now, I mean, we've got 5 years of work ahead of us with
Right.
just Pod S and continuing with Pod and continuing to support SkyShed. And what we're going to do now with Pod Max is we're going to take some of the things we learned from Pod S and simplify Max. So that'll really be our next project.
Okay.
Is sort of Pod Max version 2. Because I weekly, even though we have on the website, say currently out of production, I still get a few emails of people saying, well, when might it go back into production? Because they love us. They love their pod or their SkyShed, so they would like to buy another SkyShed product. And I just tell them, stay tuned. We'll keep you in the loop. I'll let you know if I take a list and let you know if anything changes. So I would like to bring Pod Max back. It is a great observatory. It's just very complex. I mean, to give you an idea, one or two people can build a pod, can assemble a pod in a day, in an afternoon. If you really know, if you're handy, you do it in an afternoon. Let's say a weekend, an easy weekend. A Pod S, same thing. People are getting them. They're starting Saturday morning. They're sending me photos Saturday night.
Yeah.
Maybe Sunday. The reason why I say another day is because there's a strip of seal you have to put in, let it go, overnight, cure a bit, and then continue. Pod Max takes a crew of 3 with scaffolds, ladders, 10 days, 10 hours a day. It is, again, as you move up in size exponentially because of weight, mostly.
Right.
Things just become much. Think of scopes. When you go from a 5-inch mirror or a 6-inch mirror or whatever, it's smallest. I'm trying to think of the C5 up to a 14. It's not just the mirror gets larger; it's the structure to house it and support it. Same thing. So, but I would like to get back to, because I use mine, and those who use them, it works flawlessly. It's a fantastic observatory. I love my Pod Max. You can play volleyball in there. I joke. I've got a C14 with a Hyperstar and an EQ8, and many owners of Pod Maxes have Plane Wave 17 CDKs, 20-inch. So it's for the big stuff. And here's the thing too. With the power of the small stuff, it used to be, again, 20 years ago, people went for the big scope for its pulling power, for its light gathering ability. And now, look what people are doing with Red Cats, 61 millimeters. It's all about time now. We have the technology. A guy said to me a couple of weeks ago who owns a pod, and he said, I really want to get a Planewave CDK 20-inch. What do you got for me? On an L650 mount or Planewave. There's a $100,000 setup, I guess. I'm thinking at least. And I said to him, I never want to squash anybody's dreams. I don't want to be a dream killer. But it's like, what are you going to do with that? Are you doing research on a mountain or something? He said, no, I live by the beach at the ocean. I'm thinking, that's not the best atmosphere to be running a 20-inch scope from.
Right.
And so, again, I don't want to take away from that market and what they do. It's brilliant stuff. But the need for huge, expensive equipment is not what it once was. If you want to achieve what most of us want to achieve, which is either visually observing or photographing planetary, lunar, and deep sky objects or deep space objects, unless you're doing, like, when someone says that to me, I go, are you doing research?
Right.
Is it exoplanet research? Then I understand.
That's where I went with it, yeah.
Yeah, if you have need of a 20-inch, you're probably doing exoplanet. And you use it to university, and they'll say, yes, that's exactly what we're doing.
Yep.
But unless you're hooked up with NASA and you're doing research or something, or university, most of us just don't need. So whether or not there'll be a market enough to drive a need for a Pod Max, again, I'll watch over the next year or two, and then I'll decide whether or not we invest $1 million into bringing it back into life.
Wonderful. Wow, this is great. Now, I want to ask you about one more thing.
Sure, Tim.
Glass Tiger.
Yeah.
Talk to me. Because in my research of you, I did not know I was going to go down this rabbit hole. And I spent probably 4 hours listening to your music the other day.
Oh, thank you. That's very nice. Well,
you guys are good. You guys are really good.
Thank you.
And you've been together a long time.
Yeah, and the guys are still out there. In fact, they're about to tour again here in Canada twice, before Christmas and after. And I did tour with the band up until 2017. My wife, unfortunately, was struck with long haul Lyme disease.
Oh,
she got it bad. She got it like it almost killed her.
I'm sorry.
And she still has it to this day, actually, the effects of it. and the disease itself. So she has stepped back in the company. So I'm not only the company a CEO, etc. I'm my wife's caregiver.
Okay.
I still
I'm
find
sorry to
time
hear
for that. But thank you. I'll let her know that. She'll hear the podcast as well.
that.
But I had to
If she can
step
stay
back.
awake this long, yeah.
Yeah, I had to step back from touring with the band. It was
Okay.
too much. I was leaving my wife for 40 or 50 or more days a year,
Wow.
and trying to run a business from a hotel room or backstage or at a sound check. It was very difficult, and it was unlike most bands. When the band reformed, what happened was we had great success in the 80s.
Hmm.
Excuse me. All those smoky bars I played getting to me now. But we were a 70s band, an 80s band. We had our success in the 80s. We wished we had broken through in the US. We could have, I believe.
Hmm.
We didn't spend enough time there. We spread ourselves too thin. We kept going around the world, and I would say to our management, "Let's go back to the States. Let's get out of Europe. Let's." Because what happened was we were fortunate enough to open for Journey,
Hmm.
in which great band,
Hmm.
great classic band, and they were at their peak probably then, the late 80s, and we toured with them throughout the US, 65 cities in, I'm going to say 88, 87, 88, and everywhere we went, luckily Journey were nice enough guys, they'd say, hey, if the audience calls for an encore, do it, which as an opening act, you're usually not allowed to do.
Hmm.
And so we would, and backstage, the local media, radio station guys would say, "You got to come back. You got to come back. Play the Rosetown Theater. 2,500 seats."
Fantastic.
And that's what we should have done. We should have reinforced our, because we had a lot more to offer
Hmm.
than we had the opportunity to do, and we were also swept up in that '80s hair thing. We
Hmm.
were a bunch of. The funny thing was when we started and we were teenagers, everybody I used to say looked like disciples. Everybody had long hair and beards, and then we shaved them. Punk came, and we cut our hair short, and then we grew it back again in the '80s, big time. I used to say, people say, "Oh man, you had some hairdo." I saw Brad Pitt in an interview years ago, and they were laughing at his license from 1987,
Ah.
and he said, "Oh yeah, show me yours." And it was
Exactly.
like, that's the point. And the other thing was, most of the time, I hated the long hair, and I wore it in a ponytail 90% of the time. It was only when we did the videos and the photo shoots, the hair and makeup people would come out and fluff it all up and stuff. And those are what we have to live with to this day. But we were a real family. The guys in the band were a real family, and our brothers in arms, you might say,
Hmm.
and brothers in music, certainly. And so when the band disbanded quietly, we just stopped. In
Hmm.
about 91, our time had come and gone, and we weren't interested. In those days, it took 2 or 3 years to make an album, and we'd been at it since we were 15 years old. We were now in our 30s, and the hill wasn't looking up anymore. It was looking down. So it
Hmm.
was kind of like, you know what? Let's just quit while we're ahead. But 7 years later, when I'd moved away from the big city into the country and was pursuing my interest in astronomy more, band called and said, the festivals, the classic rock festivals are calling and saying, where's Glass Tiger? And we don't want to do it like other bands where they have one or two original members. We only want to do it if we can get the whole band back together.
Wow.
I was not interested, Tim.
Oh, really?
I was like, it was like somebody saying, hey,
You'd
you
moved
want to
on.
go, you want to go back to high school? And I was like, oh, guys, but my wife was like, maybe I think she just wanted to get me out of the house,
Yeah.
out from underfoot every now and then, because she'd say, oh, it'd be great for tour see the country, make some money, be with the guys. And so I did it, and I loved it. I loved it.
Mhm.
But it became, as our business grew and grew and got busier and busier, it became tougher and tougher. And I knew that I was going to have a heart attack or something. My health
Mhm.
was going to eventually suffer, and I had to make a choice. And the easiest choice was to say to the guys, and what made it even easier was our singer had his own solo band, and of course
Mm.
that meant he had a bass player, and I'm a bass player.
Uh-huh.
So I said to him, how about Tom takes my place for touring from now on? And what's nice is the guys call me. I'm still heavily involved in the band. They call me each year and say, how are you looking for next year? And I go, you know what, Tim? I'm getting real used to not being on tour every summer, all
Hmm.
summer, every weekend, flying around the country. Get older, gets
Yeah.
tougher. It's
Yeah.
one thing when you're 20s and you're in three different cities that are across the country from each other in 72 hours, but when you're in your 60s, it takes its toll.
I hear
You
you.
see how many artists now, older artists, are constantly canceling tours and stuff out of
Oh yeah. Well,
health. You know.
like I said, I listened to a lot of the songs that are out there online, and I'm going to put a link for Glass Tiger
Thank you, thank you,
underneath this podcast so people can see that other side of your life because
thank you.
you guys are rocking. I tell you.
Well, thank you. And you know what's nice is every now and then I get a call or a text, and last year I got a call from the band, and they said we have a thing in Canada. It's like the Hollywood Walk of Fame. They duplicated the idea in Toronto. And they called it Canada's Walk of Fame, and
Hmm.
it's got your Brian Adams and your Celine Dion's and your
Okay.
you know those kind of and great Gordon Lightfoot, great Canadian
Hmm.
stars and Shania Twain and so all of a sudden I got a note that we were being inducted into Canada's Walk of Fame.
Wow.
And they've created an offshoot now called Canada's Rock of Fame.
Mm.
And what was nice was the induction ceremony for the first dozen. They wanted to get a bunch of sidewalk pieces going, so they said let's do a dozen. And what was great was some of the bands that were inducted were older than me,
Mm.
and I was fans of them my whole
Oh,
life.
very cool.
Now I'm sitting next to them, and many of them have become friends over the years through, seeing them at festivals and stuff, not hanging
Right.
around so much, and through, through the business and events and so on, and still fans, and now to be sitting with them and being inducted together and in the photos they take together, of the whole group and things, and now, like I said, I can't mention it, but now it's happening again,
Hmm.
and so those are I guess if you live long enough,
I hear you.
they start getting these lifetime achievement awards. So I've been very fortunate in my life, and I'm very thankful to. I just want to say that none of this would be possible, of course, without my wife. We're a team,
Hmm.
and as I mentioned earlier, when I put this business together, I'd always been involved in partnerships, and at some point, I ended up taking on more work than other partners. Not so much in the band at all, but in business
Hmm.
partnerships. And I said to my wife, let's do this together. We'll be the partners. And
Mm.
I wanted to create a company that I could operate from a laptop on a beach.
Mm.
I got the laptop part. I'm still waiting for the beach
There
part.
you go. There you go.
But yeah, so that's me, and I'm very thankful, and I'm very happy that astronomers have and the astronomy community have supported us all these years, and we're very happy that, like I say, more astronomers doing more astronomy, more of the time. I hope that we've helped make our link in the chain that much stronger for the next bunch to come along, and leave them a legacy of observatories being a normal thing in an astronomer's life.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you for saying that. Wayne, I want to really thank you for coming on the podcast today. This has been very enjoyable for me.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. I hope that a few people stuck around more than 5 minutes because the podcast is great, but whether or not my content is, I can't discern.
Well, I
But
was entertained.
well, thank you. And like I said, when they ask me to speak, whether it's the Rotary Club or the I gotta end with it. This will make you laugh. The Rotary Club, the local Rotary Club, asked me to speak, and again, I always say yes, and then I say, "What about?" In this case, it was about business.
Hmm.
I did the talk, and it was my very local one, and there was, I think, a dozen of us at a morning breakfast discussing what we did. So then I got a call from Stratford, a larger town in the area where they have the world famous Canadian Stratford Festival, and they said, "Would you come speak to our Rotary Club?" Now, when I do talks, I have no notes.
Hmm.
As you can probably tell, I don't need them.
Hmm.
And I just, off the top of my head, and maybe on the way to the talk, I'll formulate a few ideas. And so I got to this, it was being held at, they said, the Rotary Complex, which is like an arena complex. I figured a small room off to the side. I was walking in about 15 minutes before my talk. So all these people, I mean, hundreds of people, were walking towards the entrance. And I said, "Oh, what's going on?" Now, I had one slide with me, one slide to project on the screen. I said, "What's going on?" And this guy said, some big rock star is giving a talk and we're all going to see it. And I realized I was the rock star
Oh my goodness.
giving the talk. And I got up and the mayor was there,
Oh my goodness.
the chief of the fire department, there on a dais,
Uh,
hundreds of people. And I walked up and they introduced me, in this case, it was all about having a business in the area, an unknown business, because we're invisible. We don't have a storefront. We have no signs,
Okay.
but there's hundreds like us. And I got up, I did the talk, and the guy shook my hand, and he phoned me the next day, and he says, Wayne, I got to tell you, I've been the Toastmaster for 20 years, and I've never had anyone come and do a talk with no notes off the top of their head and keep us all entertained for half an hour. Thank you very much.
Well, good. That's
So
good.
somehow I pulled it off. So the next time you hear that I'm giving a talk somewhere, I promise you'll be entertained. I don't know what it'll be about, though.
I'm sure we will. Well,
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you.
Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Observer's Notebook podcast. I really hope you all enjoyed the conversation with Wayne Parker about the SkyShed and SkyPod observatories. We upload new episodes of the Observer's Notebook every few weeks. You can subscribe to us on iTunes. If you do, please rate and review us. I really appreciate it. You can also listen to us to Apple Radio, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Google Play, Stitcher, and you can also hear us on the ALPO YouTube channel. You can get a hold of me at commentman@commentman.net, and you can help support the podcast by donating to it via Patreon, where you can give up to $35 a month, where you receive 1 year's membership to the ALPO and producer credits on the podcast. And with that, I'd like to thank the producer of this podcast, Steve Seedtop and Michael Moyer, for their generous support. The link for Patreon as well as the link for the Alpo is in the show notes. And until next time, I hope as you always have the clear and steady skies. Thanks for listening.